Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Tony Viola. He is a former Cleveland real estate professional, and he was wrongly convicted on federal and state charges and then later exonerated. And this is an interesting case because a lot of the cases that we cover are kind of, what you might call blue collar cases. This is a white collar case, and so I'm really interested to know about your story, Tony, and kind of give us the basics, and then we can kind of drill down a little bit.
Sure. So thanks for having me on, David, and thanks for all the good work you guys are doing. I think it's terrific. So my name's Tony Viola. I'm from a big Italian Catholic family in Cleveland, Ohio. My colleagues and I started a real estate brokerage business. We were buying and selling properties in the early part of our business. And fast forward 15 years, we made some mistakes because we started with no money and we thought we knew everything at age 21. Anyway, fast forward 15 years and we built this nice company that was a brokerage business, showing properties, residential, commercial properties. We did property management and real estate auctions. Life changed in an instant when I had no criminal history. I had no experience in the justice system whatsoever. Until one day, now remember, we're realtors, so we want people to come in, except for better television. The FBI closed the door so they could kick it down on live TV, and boom, in our office, we're held at gunpoint. It's the nation's largest mortgage fraud case. Federal, state, and local law enforcement officials are ransacking our office looking for mortgage files. We're here for the mortgage documents. I said to the FBI agent, are you sure you're at the right company? We're realtors. And of course, law enforcement, they think we're being a bunch of wise asses or something. And I was being serious. I mean, there were no mortgage files. And so the government had locked themselves into an incorrect narrative. They uncorked this massive media circus, nation's largest mortgage fraud case. Tony stole $46 million, live breaking news. We have press conferences in front of my business. I was actually indicted 3 times. This is all simultaneously in federal court and state court at the same time. This is a common practice I discovered later in Cleveland and in Ohio. We're going to charge you with 4,800 felonies, and then we're going to threaten to indict your wife and your girlfriend and the dog and your grandmother. But if you just plead guilty to these two, we'll resolve the case. That's what they say. So this was just unbelievable because I remember holding my head in my hand saying that no matter what happens now, my reputation has been destroyed. Who's gonna do business with us? I'm supposedly stealing all this money. We were managing properties for people and collecting rent. Well, who's going to trust this Tony guy? So anyway, I'm indicted in federal court and state court. The indictment says I own Transcontinental Lending and Family Title Services. This is just not true. I don't own these companies. I didn't get money from these companies. And it was just shocking to me. So being naive, I thought, well, we'll get the lawyers, we'll go downtown, we'll talk to the prosecutor, we'll show my tax returns. This was unbelievable. Once they come after you, they just never veer from that initial narrative, no matter how wrong they are. Just they won't ever admit a mistake. In fact, to some extent in law enforcement, the lack of evidence, he must be guilty. There's no evidence. He's hiding it. He went to college. And so we were in this crazy situation where all over the media, these indictments claim that I stole $46 million from this mortgage and title company and scam banks into making these bogus loans. And it just was factually untrue. And the government wouldn't meet with me. By the way, I stole $46 million. The bond was zero. Here, sign here and you can go home. So the guy in the federal court building said, man, this case is a joke. And I didn't have $46 million. And I kept saying to the attorneys, well, why don't you ask the government? Oh, no, we don't have to. They don't have to tell us. And then as the case progressed, a couple things happened. One, I got a letter from the bank. This was JP Morgan Chase and Citibank, that I didn't steal money from them. And they're not asked. And in my sentencing, they didn't ask for restitution. They didn't claim they sustained any losses. But it doesn't matter. The U.S. attorney is going to prosecute me anyway because I stole $46 million from the mortgage company, even though I didn't own the mortgage company and I didn't get any money. So then an obvious defense, according to these attorneys, was, okay.
Can I interrupt real quick? So, I mean, they're accusing you of this crime. did this crime actually exist? Like, was it someone else who did it, or did they just totally invent it whole cloth?
Well, the theory of the case was that banks were duped into making no money down loans, and that people who weren't qualified were buying houses. The fact of the matter is the banks knowingly made the loans, and in a review of the lender files indicates this. So the whole theory was incorrect. The facts within that wrong theory were further incorrect because they mix me up. My name is Tony, but there's other people named Tony, and there was a guy named Tony, different Tony, who owned Family Title Services. So this is what happens when you rely on informant testimony. And in fact, the informant was having an affair with the senior assistant Ohio Attorney General, Dan Caceres. We didn't know that at the time. But this lady, Catherine Clover, told the prosecutors that Tony was at the mortgage company, when I was fibbing on how much money I made, and I wasn't really qualified for these loans, but I'm not the Tony. So the fact that and these people are so pompous and arrogant, but this is a simple fact, whether or not Tony Viola, this Tony here, owns Family Title or not, or owns Transcontinental Lending or not. Transcontinental Lending was owned by a guy named Skip Wiley and Jim Gardner, which you could look up online in about 40 seconds. And my tax returns also I don't own this company. So, in fact, our relationship with Transcontinental was our real estate company was scouting out locations for them. So these nincompoops thought that I owned the mortgage company because our realty company was finding offices for them that they could set up businesses in. That's what realtors do. So the answer is the whole thing was this crazy theory. And so the worse the government's case, the more misconduct that is committed, right? So if there's video of me shooting somebody and I admit shooting somebody and 20 people say, then there's no misconduct, right? Because it's an open and shut. It's these crazy factitious cases with these bizarre theories. In fact, the government didn't even understand the mortgage and title and real estate business. They really didn't understand the difference between a loan officer and a realtor. They hired a guy named Paul Tomko from the local community college who was supposed to teach them and go through these files and figure out, okay, this is what this person did wrong. And Tomko was later indicted for stealing inside the U.S. Attorney's Office Social Security numbers and identities and getting credit cards in these people's names. So, I mean, this is a real crime spree right inside of the U.S. Attorney's Office because our attorneys said, well, we're going to hire a forensic accountant. And we're going to, and the government had raided a bunch of companies, including these companies I didn't own. So one of the things we were going to do is have an accountant go through the Family Title or the Transcontinental and say, look, Tony Viola didn't get any money. If it's a fraud and there's millions of dollars missing and he didn't get any, there's no case, right? Somebody got shot in Anchorage, Alaska last night. Why don't we indict Tony Viola? Because he wasn't involved. So this was a simple defense that juries, would probably buy. And then Mark Bennett, the federal guy, comes to court one day and says, this is kind of looking down at the floor sheepishly, kind of mumbles that the government lost all the computers in the raids that they seized, the televised raids. We don't know where they are. And so we don't have them anymore. And the federal judge, Don Nugent, who's a prosecutor, true and true, he's basically a notary, is his function, just to do whatever the prosecutor wants. So he thinks it's funny. Ha ha, the fabled computers. Where are the computers? So then the case stops. I got to pay these lawyers. My business is being destroyed where we have this Inspector Clouseau-like search for the missing computers that the government possessed and lost. Now, you can't defend yourself if key evidence is missing that I have no other way to get. So right there, really, the case should have been dismissed, but not when you have win at all costs litigation. By the way, to fast forward, the federal prosecutor, Bennett, was fired and disbarred, and in his disbarment proceedings, it came out that he was playing poker with the judge on Thursday night. I didn't get invited to this, but court is fair, by the way. I'm sure they're fair about it. Anyway, so then the first huge amount of misconduct was that the computers went vamoose. The second thing that was fishy was the victim is saying they're not a victim. You can't have a crime or a financial crime, particularly without a victim who sustained a loss. I mean, if we talk about robbing the Easter Bunny, there's no real victim and there's no real loss. That's not a prosecutable case. And so we were in a situation where the victim says they're not, didn't really lose any money. And then the way to defend yourself is I didn't get any of these funds. And then that went vamoose too. So the other thing that was going on is these task forces are very dangerous, and they're the giant enabler of wrongdoing by prosecutors. So what happened was the federal case, so I was indicted simultaneously at the same time, just to pressure me to plead guilty, because this is reserved for like Timothy McVeigh, who blew up like the Oklahoma City, building. I mean, this is crazy. Okay. But they're trying to pressure me. Well, the federal case was going to go first. So what the task force would do, which was made up of all these constituent federal and state and local things, two things about the task force. One was that they used it as a witness screening. So like a guy named Arvin Clark from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, he'd go out and talk to somebody and they would say, Tony's innocent. And he would say, well, thank you. We'll call you if we need you. And they wouldn't go any farther. Or the prosecutor would veer and do an investigative role, and Caceres or Bennett would jump in the car and talk to somebody, and they would say, well, Tony's innocent. Thank you. And then they would never call them back. So then the federal guy could say before the federal trial, we never interviewed Sarah Swartz. We never interviewed Michelle Chrissy. We never interviewed Michelle Zanobi. These are all witnesses who said I was innocent at the second trial. And we never interviewed Rod Whittington. We don't know anything about these people. So this was institutionalized misconduct. And then the other thing is you have the perfect bureaucratic aw shucks. Well, we gave the evidence we were supposed to. So if something's wrong, whose fault is it? It's the task force's fault, which is not prosecutable or punishable because it's an entity. So the FBI blames the task force. Well, we sent the stuff there. We don't know what happened. We gave what we were supposed to give. So this is very dangerous with all these law enforcement agencies. So another thing about the federal and state prosecution is when the government wanted to, they would say, well, we're dual sovereigns. Ohio has an interest in this matter, the federal government, so we're going to prosecute because each has the vindicated sovereign interest in the nation's largest scheme. You caused the financial crisis, Tony. But when they wanted to work together, the state guy becomes a special AUSA. And so what you had is the government's talking out of both sides of their mouth. We're working together. No, we're not. We're separate. We're together. So, and then the judges are pliant with prosecutors. So they throw their arms up in the air, and the state judge would say, well, I can't order the federal people to do anything, Tony. You got to go into federal court. So we're being hopscotched back and forth to federal court, state court. Mark Bennett's over here in federal court. Caceres over here. They're both at each. They're all at each, but they're supposedly separate. So what it was it was designed to just wear us out and make it impossible to fight the case. And then I got more misconduct to talk about, but maybe I'll let you ask a question too if you have anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting as I listen to this because I don't do a lot of white collar cases, but what you're describing, I mean, the details are different, but the conduct is exactly the same. Like, the failed investigations, the corruption, the coziness, all of that, you see it all over the place. They double down when they don't have the evidence. They make stuff up when it's in their favor. They conveniently forget to interview key people. I mean, it is unbelievable. And, why I like interviewing someone like you is in a lot of these cases, the general public can't really relate to the defendants because, they're like, well, I wouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. What happened to you could happen to anyone.
Well, listen, I had a real estate lawyer who used to give seminars at our sales meetings to teach us how to fill out these addendums, and he wrote them. But the government said they were fraudulent, and the real estate lawyer got them off the HUD website, the government's website, or the local realtor board's website. So just as one example. So yes, if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody because we took extreme precautions. When I first heard about this, I thought it was a joke because the lending standards were so lax that it was shocking that the notion that anybody would commit fraud. These lenders were just approving these loans, with no questions asked routinely. So if a particular transaction couldn't sell, you'd sell it to somebody else. And so the idea that you would commit fraud, I thought was preposterous. And of course, the banks weren't victims because they knew it. So just real quick on fraud, if I want to sell you my house and there's water in the basement and I tell you, I say, hey, David, there's water in the basement. Okay, you might offer less, you might get a contractor. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is if I hide it, if I put a couch in front of it and you ask and I said, no, it's fine. That's concealing a material fact, and that may have affected your decision to either buy it or at the price you're paying. So the fact that the lenders were, I mean, the contracts weren't fraudulent. Our lawyer wrote them. And the fact that the lenders had this information in their file meant it was disclosed. They could say no. I mean, we didn't go to the JP Morgan underwriting office with like guns and make them approve the loans, right? So, and then the other thing is the realtor's not even involved with the financing. You know, in real estate land, there's fair housing laws. If someone's qualified or can afford up to a price point, you show them property. And so we don't even get involved with this whole thing. By the way, the same guys that commit the misconduct in the drug cases or the other cases are these same people. I mean, Dan Caceres is supposedly the economics crimes prosecutor, but he's done these dismemberment cases where somebody's chopped up and put in a freezer, and he goes on the Oxygen Network and talks about it and portrays himself as an expert. He's doing a case now called Amanda Dean, who was a government informant who was later murdered, and there's a little bit of a cover up because nobody looked for this lady after she was missing. Anyway, so yes, these same characters veer into these other cases, and they just really didn't have a true understanding of what a realtor does or what a loan officer. They were just convinced. They looked at it like a drug case. Well, everybody in this chain is guilty, and you know, if you're the lookout dude or you're the paying off the border guy, you know, you're all in a conspiracy. So they would say, well, this wouldn't have closed if the realtor wasn't involved. So, but of course, selling real estate, you know, here's what they said. They said, if you see Tony Viola at a Starbucks with his briefcase, you know, and some papers on a table, that's not breakfast. That's a crime scene. I mean, this is the stuff that they were saying. But if you call a realtor and want to see houses and you're qualified, we're going to get in the car and show you property. Okay. Newsflash, prosecutors.
Right.
So then let me tell you what happens next, unless you have other questions.
Well, yeah, what I wanted to do is kind of lay out exactly, you know, what happened here. So, like, it sounds like you went to two trials, you were found guilty, and then eventually exonerated. So, maybe a 30,000 foot overview, and then we can drill down a little more.
Right. So the prosecutors at some point, because I never said no comment once to a journalist. I kept going on TV. I brought the indictment into TV stations and I said, look, I don't own these companies. How stupid are these people? We used to have a thing called Quiznos. It's like a Subway. I said they should go buy a Quiznos franchise and make the toasted bun. These people should not be in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So they're absolutely going bonkers. Mark Bennett, I mean, these are some incredibly arrogant people. And initially, they love the publicity of it all. I mean, Dan Caceres almost ran over a lady in court, some lady in a wheelchair. You know, one of the local TV channels was setting up the cameras. So they love the publicity. Then all of a sudden they got a problem because the case is all screwed up. So basically what happened was they decided to have their office manager, a lady named Dawn Pacella, pretend to be a paralegal to spy on our defense. Okay, so they were able to identify our witnesses before the federal trial, and they never turned over any of the exculpatory evidence that they possessed, including lender interviews. A guy from the bank comes in, a guy named Steve Newcomb, and he says, look, I don't want to testify against this guy. We signed off on these loans. These files contain these key terms. And they threaten him and say, well, you didn't see these particular files. You're just going to come in and say you don't like the loans or they smell bad or something. So anyway, all this is going on. We don't know it. I go to trial. I lose the first trial, federal trial. And then I'm ordered to return to sentencing, but I'm still out on bond. And then that's when Dawn comes forward and she tells me I'm not a paralegal helping defense lawyers. I'm actually recorded all your trial strategy. And the prosecutors found out. So like Brian Stark was one of my witnesses. He was a colleague. The FBI goes and they find out he's going to testify and they threaten him. We're going to put you in jail. We're going to raid your company. We'll indict your wife. And so he says, I can't help you. So the whole federal trial was tainted for a variety of reasons. One of which was these attorneys were representing government informants and other co-defendants and signed a joint defense agreement, which I never agreed to. So the defense bar is a joke because they love prosecutors. If I wasn't indicted, I wouldn't be the idiot sitting in their lobby with a big check. So the defense lawyers really weren't willing to fight very much either. And so things were coming forward that they didn't really use in the first trial, like the affair with the prosecutor and the lead witness. But for whatever reason, I'm convicted, but not sentenced. Dawn comes forward, says, I work for the prosecutor's office. You're innocent, and there's tons of evidence. And I said, well, where is this evidence? And she said, well, I've been taking it out of the prosecutor's office. So this is like a defendant's dream, right? So all the shenanigans that they're playing, she had a front row seat. She saw emails between the witnesses. She said they would have meetings together to get their story straight. So prosecutors and well, first of all, prosecutors aren't supposed to interview witnesses. Prosecutors are supposed to present the case in court. The detectives and the FBI are supposed to interview witnesses, but they veered all these different jobs and they all just did it all together. But the fact is, she's giving me stuff that only an insider would know and giving me documents that only an insider would possess, like an email for all the witnesses to come at the same time so we can get the story straight, so we can put Tony in jail because we're wrong, but we're arrogant and don't want to admit a mistake. It's insane. The other thing that's great is our best evidence of prosecutorial misconduct are emails between Mark Bennett and Dan Caceres, the federal and state prosecutor. They're talking about using perjured testimony. I mean, they actually say, we know the witness is lying, but it, quote, jeopardizes the outcome of the case if we withdraw it or alter it. So we have to use false testimony. This is the ultimate materiality test. The prosecutors themselves are saying, man, if this guy doesn't lie or this lady doesn't lie, we could lose. God forbid you lose, right? So let's put an innocent person in prison. It's cool because we're arrogant and don't want to admit it because we already went on TV. So anyway, Dawn comes forward and tells me all this, and I use the evidence that she provided to win the second trial. But I was in prison for 10 years, and it took that long to finally get released from prison. If it wasn't for Dawn, I would have lost the second trial and been in jail the rest of my life.
Wow. That is incredible. And unfortunately, at the same time, typical, which I think is part of the point here. But again, I like that to see this at, I mean, I don't like to see it, but I like hearing these stories of, people that are white collar people getting caught up in the criminal legal system like this, because this is what happens to people all the time.
Correct.
Unfortunately, most of them don't have the wherewithal and the resources that you evidently had to be able to, and the luck. I mean,
Yes.
that's the other thing. Like, I was just talking to this lady who ended up in prison for 16 years for this child molestation case in Texas that no crime ever happened. It was completely fabricated. And the thing is like, with all these cases, you're incredibly unlucky to get into the system, but incredibly lucky to be able to exonerate yourself. And in your case, I mean, that lady just handed you a golden ticket.
Right. I mean, a couple things. First of all, my case is not a DNA case, right? So if I'm not guilty, the 1,200 other people this task force went after are probably wrongfully convicted. So there's high stakes.
Right.
I mean, that's one thing. And we'd like to get all these cases reviewed or thrown out, particularly where this Catherine Clover, who was sleeping with the prosecutor, was involved. But the other thing is, there's no question about it. It's just another day at the office. They didn't do this to me. Yeah, we don't like Tony. So this is just what they do. I mean, this is
Right.
just what goes on in there. And wrongful convictions are not mistakes. A lot of people, and even some of these innocence projects are run by prosecutors or former prosecutors, and they would have you believe that, some witness goofed and it really wasn't Tony coming out of the drugstore with the gun. It was David, or he got into a brown car, not a blue car, and it's some witness screwed up. This is intentional criminality by prosecutors. I mean, in my case, we have witness tampering, we have obstruction of justice by destroying the computers, we have due process violations because we have just the use of perjured testimony that the government knows is perjured. I mean, it's a basic tenet. Napew versus Illinois, and just the Glossop case recently that came out. The prosecutors are not allowed to use perjured testimony to win cases. And when they know it's perjured, they're supposed to withdraw it. I have a great lawyer named Kim Corral, and Yale Law School is helping with my case. But I mean, they're great people, but they shouldn't have to do anything. The prosecutors are supposed to withdraw the false testimony. So what the prosecutors have done in my case, and it leaves a paper trail if you track it and you keep suing them and all this, they'll say whatever they have to say at any given moment. So, for instance, I raised an issue of conflict of interest. Hey, these lawyers, representing defendants, co-defendants, government informants, I never agreed to it. I never signed some joint defense. So Mark Bennett, the federal guy, says, well, I signed it's joint defense waiver. The court had a hearing. And that's not true. But the appeals court ruled against me. You got some dude in jail typing on a 1973 IBM Selectric typewriter, and you got the, respected U.S. attorney. And by the way, the judges were used to be U.S. attorneys or assistant U.S. attorneys. So they just take their word for it, and there's just no quality control. As Kim would say, we favor finality over justice, this idea of res judicata.
So when did this start? Like, when were you first contacted by the federal prosecutors?
So in December of 2008, my office was raided with people running around the office looking for guns. And
And
then
then when were you convicted?
Then the first trial started in mid 2011, and I was convicted, but I wasn't sentenced until 2012, early 2012.
And then you got out in 2022?
I spent 10 years in jail. It's called a dime in federal prison lingo. I did a dime. And but during the time I was incarcerated, there was a second trial that I won. And the federal judge refused to, he said, well, I'm not entertaining that evidence. It was on the exact same charges and all this new evidence. And it was a real grind. And then they kept, it's called diesel therapy. They kept shipping me to different jails so I couldn't do legal work or talk to journalists. And so I was on this global jail tour. But I started litigating part of my case in Pennsylvania where they stuck me. And that actually was helpful because a court in Erie initially ruled against me. But then when Mark Bennett, the federal guy, was disbarred and fired for lying about other things, he lied in my case too. And they said he lied in my case. And then some other person said, wait a minute, we can't say these representations are accurate. So it's a heck of a thing to have the government bebop into court and say, yo, for the last 10 years, everything we've said is withdrawn. We can no longer, I mean, so then I got assigned attorneys, and then that's how Yale took the case. I was released from prison after they admitted lying about evidence. My first conviction, though, we're still litigating to get rid of the first conviction, believe it or not. So
Wow.
this ongoing litigation with the shenanigans. So the people admitted lying, and we're still, I mean, why does this have to be litigated? And the other thing that happened was that
So
Dawn,
you haven't been compensated even.
no, not yet. And I really, the thing is, these compensation to wrongful convicted folks, it's really the taxpayers paying it. I mean, these
Right.
prosecutors need to lose their pension. We need to eliminate qualified immunity in these states that have it, like Ohio, and let them be responsible. If they thought they would go to jail or lose their pension, I don't think you'd have as much misconduct.
Yeah. The one thing I would say, having looked at a lot of wrongful conviction cases, there are kind of layers to this stuff. Like, there are prosecutors that I think acted in good th faith that just made mistakes. I'm not saying that's a lot, but there are some. But in a lot of these cases, it gets into this willful ignorance thing, tunnel vision, all the confirmation bias, all of these things, and you start wondering at what point these people are not being honest, and then in some cases it's just flat out fraud. Like they're inventing stuff whole cloth to back up a theory that didn't make any sense from the start.
Yes, I agree with you. And even within the task force, there were good people. Well, Dawn worked in the task force and helped me, but Dan Caceres, the prosecutor, he would jump in his car and go meet people, and he wouldn't take notes, or he would keep it to himself because he was afraid that if they actually had a legitimate investigator interview a witness, they would write down what they said. If it was exculpatory, somebody might turn it over. So I mean, it's true that on one hand, that Caceres and Bennett were up to their eyeballs in shenanigans, but it's not true that every single other person was there, whether they were willfully blind or just kind of didn't dig too deep. That might be part of it. Part of it was Dawn was brilliant and she actually understood what these documents meant. So she actually would go through it and say, wait a minute, this bank signed off on it and said the person doesn't need a down payment. Why are we putting Tony in jail because somebody bought a house without a down payment? So like Dawn was very inquisitive and naturally curious, and she questioned things. She would always question, like, why is that? Like when she was a kid, her mom told me, she used to say, you got to go to bed at 8 o'clock. Why? Where's that come from? So I was lucky that Dawn was brilliant enough to understand that. The other thing, though, is that there's also the first rule of holes. You ever hear that? Stop digging. So once they locked themselves into an incorrect narrative, and once they destroyed the computers, all the other misconduct, and there's a whole pile more of it we can go over, it's almost in their mind, well, we already, we can't let this go away because we already destroyed these computers. We don't want that to get out. So then we're going to do witness intimidation or witness tampering. And then the prosecutor was having an affair with the witness. So then he compounded the felony by giving her undisclosed benefits and then getting her a job in the prosecutor's office. They didn't tell the jurors. This lady's supposed to be a fact witness, just telling what she knows. They didn't bother to tell the jurors, hey, she's actually the paralegal in the prosecutor's office / witness, grand jury extraordinaire witness, 35 different grand jury proceedings she testified in. That's why this is a serious case that, I don't really want the money. I want these cases to be thrown out. I want these prosecutors to go to jail because this is not a wrongful convictions here. It's not a mistake. It's not a temporary lapse in judgment. It's not a screw up. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But here we have, again, in writing. I mean, Dan Caceres is putting in writing about altering documents. They're actually talking about altering documents inside the prosecutor's office. Okay, so that's an obstruction of justice. That's interfering with a government proceeding. I mean, there's all kinds of felonies. And then we've got the whole witness tampering and intimidation with Dawn, having her wear a wire and record my trial preparation at my real estate office and at the attorney's office is a crime. After you're indicted, if the government wants to talk to you, they got to bring you downtown and you can sit with your lawyer and talk to the prosecutor. They can't illegally go around that constitutional Sixth Amendment right to counsel and have their administrative lady conduct an uncounseled interview and then find out your trial strategy and play it for the prosecutors. It would be the same as if I bugged the conference room in the prosecutor's office. So if I did that, you could hear them whining on television. Oh my God, I'm, obstructing justice and, law and order. We're going to smash this guy. But they did it to me. And the judges find it amusing or interesting. They're sort of like Don Nugent is sort of like a connoisseur of like, oh, that's interesting. That's a new kind of misconduct. I haven't seen it. Ha ha. Because we're playing poker and we're playing polo. They go ride horses with the, they take the ball and move it forward with the horse. This is what they're doing. The prosecutors and judges in some place in Rocky River, Ohio, are hanging out. The court's fair though. So I mean, they're in the same building, by the way. The judges are upstairs. The prosecutors are downstairs. The judges were former prosecutors, so you go from the fourth floor, you go to 11, 12, 13, you get your big courtroom, and a lot of them preside over cases that they actually investigated when they were in the prosecutor's office. So it's just you just have no chance. Once
So
you're
was this
there,
actually in Cuyahoga County or
in the
somewhere else?
federal, this was in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court, but I won that trial. The federal courts in Cleveland downtown, we just did a rally in front of the courts. The prosecutors are on the fourth floor. The judges are right upstairs. You just go right upstairs and be a judge. By the way, interestingly, the government since 2016 has been under a court order to produce these voice recordings that Dawn Pasella made, and they have still yet to comply. So can you imagine, David, if you had some key document or recording that the government wanted and a federal judge ordered you? I mean, if you didn't comply within a single digit number of days, they'd have the marshals over there and you'd be in contempt and you'd go to jail. But here it's cool, they tell me, well, there's holidays, we're busy, we've had turnover. I mean, there's every excuse under the sun now that we're trying to finally correct the injustice and have a new investigation in what happened to Dawn. But when they were doing this to me, I mean, they admitted lying about evidence in 2019. This is 6 years later, we're still screwing around with the litigation. But when they were raiding and we had guns and helicopters and SWAT teams and pontoon boats in Lake Erie, we don't want these realtors swimming to Canada. We never missed court. We never missed court. We never had a delay. We had court the day before Thanksgiving. I got sentenced to jail January 2nd. So no delays. Now, when you try to undo it, I mean, now it's slow as molasses in January, as they say.
Unbelievable, except it is believable. So, I mean, it sounds like the answer to my next question is there's been no accountability so far, other than the guy accidentally getting disbarred.
Well, yeah, Mark Bennett was fired. This is failing upward in the law enforcement. He was fired from the Ohio Attorney General's office for harassing women using his position of authority to extract whatever, asking for sexual favors and shenanigans. And then he went over to the U.S. Attorney's office and did the same thing. And both Caceres and Mark Bennett have a long history of using their authority to either rescue the damsel in distress or use their authority for very suspicious reasons. So Bennett basically harangued an intern, demanded sex before he would write a letter of recommendation. And she finally complained. She, for a couple of years, I guess, she had tried to move offices. Like, no one thought it was weird that the intern is now 100 miles away in Youngstown, Ohio, or in Canton, Ohio. It's really an unbelievable story. And then finally, all this came forward that Bennett had been doing this routinely, and there was an investigation. The key where it ties to my case is Mark Bennett lied about what was on his computer. He said he was not using social media, but it turned out he had been soliciting sex online from his government computer. This is in the Inspector General report or on our website, the freetonyviola.com evidence log, where you can read it for yourself and decide. So, but the thing is, at the same time, my case was heating up and it was coming to a head, and a new lawyer was assigned because Caceres and Bennett were intercepting all the state and federal records requests and saying, no, you got everything, there's nothing new. And then, of course, I had records that they'd never produced. So Dawn gave me FBI reports that the government claimed they couldn't find. So I kept filing. I have grand jury testimony. I just kept filing stuff that, oh, there's nothing else. And I just kept filing things in court. Again, in Pennsylvania, not Cleveland. If this was in Cleveland, Don Nugent would have disposed of this, years ago. But luckily, there was a judge who didn't care or enough about it to really cover it up or play games. And so the judge let me just keep piling onto this factual record and then ruled against me. But the appellate court, it was so crazy because the government statements were contradicted by their own evidence. So, like, real quick, they claimed, the federal government claimed they never put any evidence at the task force. So Dawn could never have given me federal evidence. This whole thing was a lie, they said. And then I kept filing like these receipts that the FBI brought 28 boxes of records from the U.S. Attorney's Office to the task force. So, like, the government is producing records in this litigation that contradicted what they were saying in court, and times 100. So finally, some judge, and I just put them together. I just had a grid. This is what they're saying. This is why it's false. This is what they're saying. And so I did a pleading that only was government documents, nothing I'm saying. They lied here. They lied page 47. This is false. See the attached government piece of paper. So I got a lawyer and I got out of prison because of it. But the answer is nobody's been held accountable, and it's a combination of bureaucratic inertia. And then in law enforcement, the rule is, I might not have been a perfect angel, so I don't really want anyone coming after me. So I'm gonna turn a blind eye to shenanigans down the hall. I just want to get my check this week. And so, and then lastly, there's a lot of defense lawyers who like Mark Bennett because he did a lot of favors. He used his authority. There's a guy named Roger Sinnenberg. And, when Bennett got fired and disbarred, there was people that wrote letters of recommendation and saying he shouldn't be punished very severely because Bennett had used his authority to cut friendly deals with certain people. So you have cases where one guy goes to jail for 20 years, the other guy's convicted of the same thing. He's got 30 days in prison. In the white collar cases, you have people in the same conspiracy, and one guy's got $4 million of restitution, the other guy has $3,000, which is illegal because in a conspiracy, everybody's responsible joint and severally for all losses. And so Bennett would say things like, well, that person didn't make that much money. But restitution is based on the loss of the victim, not the profit of the perpetrator. So what you see is that there's favors. It's just buddy favors with Mark Bennett and some of these defense lawyers. So it's brutal if you fight, and and they take it personally. They get very upset. So anyway, there's no real accountability yet, although we're working on it. We're not giving up.
And then my last question is, you've kind of turned this experience into a platform for justice. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, Dawn Pasella came forward to help me. And I wasn't paying her. She was just trying to do the right thing. So I'm very grateful to her. She was supposed to testify at the second trial and was found dead under very fishy circumstances. And her computer with all the evidence was missing. So you can go to Justice for Dawn and learn about that disaster. But to honor Dawn's legacy and to stop this nonsense from happening, yes, we are. I recognize people aren't going to riot in the streets because Tony's not a realtor anymore or Tony went to jail. The criminality by prosecutors in Cleveland inside the U.S. Attorney's Office and inside the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office is epic. And this has got to stop. The threat to the public is not Russia or China or whatever this nonsense we're supposed to be worried about. This abuse of authority is unbelievable. We are destroying people's lives. Dawn Pasella lost her lives. We've had people in prison for decades that get out of jail, and some detective who's now teaching criminal justice flippantly says, well, we knew we did something, so we didn't turn over the evidence. You have detectives and prosecutors being judge, jury, and executioner. This has got to change. And the way you do it is you remove immunity from these people. And there's an effort in Ohio to do that. And you drive accountability. Right now in our country, an honest prosecutor will not win as many cases as a dishonest prosecutor, and the system favors dishonest prosecutors who win cases, get on TV. Half the United States Senate are former prosecutors. The Ohio Attorney General, he knows Dan Caceres, Dave Yost. He knows that Dan Caceres is up to no good, and he's been up to no good, but he's won high-profile cases, and Yost can go on TV and talk about law and order. So we want this to end. What happened to me can't be undone. What happened to Dawn can't be undone. But what we can do is drive change by getting these two knuckleheaded prosecutors arrested and imprisoned for their criminal activities, and drive messages into these law enforcement offices. We don't hate the police. We're not saying to eliminate all prosecutors, but the authority is not being used wisely, and injustices that are obvious are not being corrected. It is absolutely destroying the public's confidence in the fair administration of justice. So we hope that this ends. And if please join up with us. And of course, you're doing good work too to highlight this. You know, if I was a crazy person in my real estate business, that would be bad. These people are using taxpayer money and the power of the government to do wrong things. It is absolutely at a different level when government authorities and powerful officials that are paid for by taxpayers are breaking the law in the name of law and order. So it just has to stop. Otherwise, we're going to destroy the country and destroy lives, meaning just for no reason. And I wouldn't wish this on anybody. What goes on in those prisons, that's a whole separate thing. It is evil, and it has to stop. So it's just not right to treat people like this. There's no justification for it.
And give people your web address.
So you can go to justicefordawn.com to read about what happened to Dawn Pasella. You can watch some investigative series about that. And then if you want to read about my case or sign up for a newsletter or help us or be a guest blogger, freetonyviola.com. That's free. And then my name, TonyViola.com. There's a contact us platform page. You can submit a tip. If any of the information we have might help somebody else, has a similar case, we're happy to share it. So if people have been the victim of an injustice, please speak up. Don't let it go. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for a bigger cause. You're fighting a good fight and trying to stop other people from being hurt for no good reason.
All right. We've been talking with Tony Viola. He has an amazing story. This has been Everyday Injustice. Join us again next week for more tales from the injustice system.